In the year 383 AD, the Roman Empire stood at a fatal crossroads. The legions were no longer invincible, the borders were crumbling under the pressure of the Goths and Vandals, and in the wealthiest cities, corruption had replaced the discipline that once made Rome great. It was against this backdrop of decay, when public morality was fatally wounded, that a scandal shook the foundations of the capital of the ancient world. It was neither a sack nor an invasion. The horror arose at the very heart of one of Rome's most prestigious families, the Claudii. What occurred there was so aberrant that even chroniclers accustomed to recounting imperial excesses, from Caligula's delusions to Nero's whims, shuddered when putting it into writing. The archives of the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, preserved in the Vatican Library, reveal the story of a man named Maximinus. Senator, patrician, landowner, and heir to a lineage dating back to the days of Augustus. In the eyes of the people, an exemplary Roman, to those who knew him, a domestic tyrant whose depravity defied all limits. Maximinus did not merely accumulate power and wealth. He used it to twist the law, break the most sacred family bonds, and subject his own son to a fate that history would remember as one of the darkest episodes of Roman decadence. His name was erased from monuments, his properties destroyed, and yet the documents survived, allowing us today to reconstruct the story that Rome wished to silence. Prepare yourself, what you are about to hear is neither fiction nor exaggeration. It is a faithful portrait of how ambition and perversion can flourish when there are no limits to power. If you are interested in discovering the darkest secrets of the Roman Empire, be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Believe me, what follows will challenge everything you thought you knew about Rome. Maximinus was no ordinary man. He belonged to the powerful gens Claudia, a lineage that since the time of Augustus had placed senators, consuls, and generals in the highest spheres of power. He inherited vast estates in Campania, villas on the Palatine, and control of mines in Hispania that enriched his coffers with gold and silver. But what truly distinguished Maximinus was not his wealth, but his ability to navigate the shadowy corridors of the Senate. Ambitious and calculating, he knew how to exploit the internal struggles that tore the empire apart in the 4th century. When the provinces of the East rebelled against Emperor Theodosius, Maximinus was one of the few senators who firmly remained on the sovereign's side. That loyalty earned him rewards, new positions, honors, and a privileged place in imperial ceremonies. To the public, he was an example of Roman discipline. To his adversaries, a man to be feared more than hated. His power also extended into the private sphere. In his domus in Rome, a mansion housing more than 200 slaves and freedmen, Maximinus ruled like a miniature emperor. The mosaics adorning the halls, excavated centuries later by archaeologists, depicted scenes of exotic hunts, endless banquets, and obscene dances. It was a space designed not only to impress guests but also to make clear that within those walls, Maximinus's will was the only law. Amid this opulence lived Lucius, his only son, born of his first wife who died in childbirth. From a young age, Lucius became the focus of his father's obsessive attention. Later testimonies from slaves reveal that he was never allowed to mingle with other Roman youths of his age. His world was limited to the gardens, fountains, and halls of the family villa. Maximinus kept him under constant surveillance, surrounded by personal guards who escorted him even on the most trivial walks. But Maximinus's obsession went beyond protection. Judicial records found in the urban prefect's archives describe how the senator designed a unique, almost experimental educational regime. Instead of teaching Lucius the virtues of a young aristocrat, rhetoric, military art, public administration, he subjected him to training focused on domestic and feminine skills, embroidery, dance, chamber music, and the art of organizing banquets. The Greek tutor Aristophanes, hired to instruct the boy, wrote in papyri discovered in Oxyrhynchus about his bewilderment at Maximinus's orders. "I am not allowed," he wrote, "to teach him to reason like a Roman man or to speak in public. I must only cultivate in him the graces of a maiden destined for marriage." The isolation and distorted education soon bore results. Slaves testified that by the age of 12, Lucius already wore feminine tunics, adorned himself with jewelry and perfumes, and wore hairstyles reserved for patrician matrons. Maximinus tolerated no deviation from this plan. Any attempt by his son to behave like other boys his age was punished with prolonged fasting or confinement in the villa's darkest rooms. Over the years, Lucius's figure was molded until he became unrecognizable. By 16, his appearance resembled that of a young woman of the Roman aristocracy. Frescoes discovered in the villa's ruins depict him in stola and palla, the traditional garments of women of his class. And physicians of the time, according to records preserved in the College of Physicians of Rome, suspected that Maximinus had even experimented with herbal treatments that altered his son's physical development. The result was a broken young man, trapped between an imposed identity and the crushing shadow of his father. Chroniclers who documented these events agree that long before the scandal erupted, the tragedy was already written on Lucius's body and in his mind. And yet, the worst was still to come. For Maximinus was not content with controlling his son's life. What he planned to do with him in adulthood would surpass anything Rome had witnessed until then. In the autumn of 382 AD, the entire city of Rome was shaken by an announcement that seemed lifted from delirium. Maximinus, a senator of the powerful Claudia gens, declared his intention to marry his own son, Lucius. The news was not whispered but proclaimed officially. Confident in his power and convinced of his impunity, Maximinus sent messengers to the Senate and organized banquets where he publicly proclaimed his decision. Chroniclers like Sozomen and Philostorgius recorded the general astonishment. Never before in the history of the empire had such an act been witnessed. The patrician families were divided. Some, fearing the loss of commercial alliances with the Claudii, remained silent. Others immediately severed ties, horrified by what they considered an insult not only to Roman morality but also to the emerging Christian faith, which was already gaining ground in Emperor Theodosius's court. The preparations were as lavish as they were macabre. Maximinus commissioned a wedding dress for Lucius made from purple silk imported from Constantinople and gold thread from Dacia, a garment that cost as much as maintaining a legion for a year. The banquet promised 3 days of celebrations, with musicians, acrobats, and gladiators, all funded by the gold from his family's Spanish mines. But the splendor could not hide the reality. The villa's slaves, whose testimonies survived in judicial archives, described Lucius's mental state in the days leading up to the wedding: uncontrollable crying fits, episodes of mutism, and panic attacks whenever the word marriage was mentioned. Some claimed he spent nights repeating the same phrase, "I am not what he says I am." On the day of the ceremony, the villa was filled with guests, senators, political clients, and officials who feared rejecting the invitation. No one wanted to be associated with Maximinus, but even less with his wrath. Christian priests refused to officiate the ritual, so the senator turned to a Mithraic priest, part of an Eastern cult still tolerated in Rome. His name was Gaius Valerius Maximus, and for his participation, he was later exiled to the Gauls. Lucius appeared before the guests dressed in a white stola and a bridal veil, his face made up and hands adorned with feminine rings. Witnesses claimed he looked more like a specter than a human being. During the ceremony, he suffered convulsions and fell into a catatonic silence, but Maximinus forced him to continue, assuring those present that his wife was simply overwhelmed with emotion. The consummation of the marriage, according to the records, took place in the presence of carefully chosen witnesses, a repulsive practice that Maximinus justified by appealing to archaic interpretations of Roman law. That night sealed one of the darkest pages in senatorial history. The consequences were immediate. Several influential families severed ties with the Claudii, and rumors of the abomination reached the Imperial Palace itself. Emperor Theodosius, pressured by conservative senators and Christian advisors, ordered an official investigation. But even before the judicial machinery could begin, Roman society reacted. Chronicles from the period recount disturbances in the Forum, with outraged citizens demanding justice and threatening to lynch Maximinus if the courts did not act. The Praetorian Guard had to deploy a security cordon around the Domus Claudia to prevent a popular assault. What Maximinus had conceived as a demonstration of absolute power became his death sentence. The Senate, the people, and even the emperor were against him. And most disturbing of all, Lucius, the silenced victim, would soon be forced to testify against the man who had destroyed him. By the spring of 383 AD, the scandal had reached uncontrollable proportions. Emperor Theodosius, pressured by both traditional senators and Christian bishops, ordered the opening of an official investigation into Maximinus and the events at the Domus Claudia. The task was entrusted to Flavius Abundantius, Praetorian prefect and one of the most incorruptible men of his time. His mission was not easy. Maximinus had amassed a colossal fortune and knew how to use it to buy silence. In fact, the first summoned witnesses were found dead in the streets of Rome, showing signs of torture that sent a clear message: speaking against the senator meant death. Meanwhile, anyone who might question that succession disappeared: false accusations, exiles, and discreet executions. One of the most remembered cases was that of Domitia Lepida, Nero's aunt, accused of witchcraft and executed. In just a few years, Agrippina had gone from exile to becoming the most powerful figure in the empire. The Senate feared her, courtiers flattered her, and Claudius seemed increasingly dependent on her. But Agrippina's success carried an inevitable danger. Claudius began to realize how much control he had lost. And in the palace corridors, he started to murmur something that would prove fatal for her: the idea of returning the succession to Britannicus. The empress had played her hand perfectly. She had seduced Claudius, changed the law, and secured the succession for her son. But in Rome, power was never eternal. Claudius began to have doubts, and Agrippina knew that in the imperial court, doubt had only one solution: poison. Agrippina's plan seemed flawless. Nero was already the official heir, Octavia, Claudius' daughter, his fiancée, and Britannicus had been sidelined. But the emperor was beginning to open his eyes. Over the months, Claudius regained some autonomy and began expressing doubts in private. According to chroniclers, he even said, "May the gods forgive me, but perhaps I chose the wrong successor. Britannicus is my true son, and he must rule." For Agrippina, these words were a death sentence. If Claudius acted, she would not only lose power but also be exposed to the revenge of those she had eliminated on her rise. Agrippina turned to a specialist, Locusta, the most feared poisoner in Rome. Of Gallic origin, she had perfected the art of killing without leaving a trace. Together, they devised a meticulous plan. The poison chosen came from the Amanita phalloides, the death cap. Its effects were nearly impossible to detect, mimicked a natural illness, and proved fatal within hours. The dilemma was how to bypass the emperor's personal taster. For this, Agrippina used her network of trusted slaves. The poison would not be placed on any dish, but on Claudius' favorite, mushrooms and sauce, ensuring he insisted on eating them himself. October, 54 AD. Claudius convened an intimate banquet in the palace, accompanied by his family. The evening passed without incident: wine, forced laughter, political conversations. The mushroom dish was served with care. No one suspected that this tray carried the emperor's ruin. Claudius devoured it enthusiastically, unaware of what had happened between kitchen and table. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But after an hour, the nightmare began: dizziness, abdominal pain, violent vomiting. The imperial doctors tried emergency remedies, believing it was indigestion. Agrippina, meanwhile, played her role perfectly, appearing concerned, attentive, anxious about her husband's health, but in silence, awaiting the outcome. The agony continued throughout the night. Claudius alternated between convulsions and moments of delirium. At dawn on October 13th, he lost consciousness. Agrippina immediately took control of the situation. She sealed the rooms, allowed access only to trusted doctors and slaves, and sent messages to the most influential military commanders: upon Claudius' death, Rome must recognize Nero as emperor without hesitation. By noon, the emperor was officially declared dead, apparently from natural causes related to his advanced age. The court accepted the explanation without question, at least publicly. That same day, Nero, only 17 years old, was proclaimed emperor of Rome. Agrippina presented him as the legitimate successor, ensuring that it was Claudius' wish. But everyone in the palace knew there was more behind that perfect transition. The rumor of poison began to spread like an unstoppable whisper, although no one dared confront her. Agrippina had achieved the unthinkable. Within hours, she had turned her husband's assassination into her son's coronation. Rome had a new emperor, but the real power remained in her hands.